In March of 2021, I came to the floor and spoke about Xavier Becerra's abysmal record before voting to confirm him as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Here is what I pointed out to my colleagues. He had no meaningful experience in public health, no meaningful experience running a large-scale logistical operation, a career's worth of hostility toward basic constitutional rights. And my colleagues across the aisle didn't listen on this, and now his record as secretary is worse than anyone could have imagined or predicted. My colleagues who helped confirm him entrusted him with the lives of some of the world's most vulnerable children. Unaccompanied minors who are apprehended by Border Patrol are transferred to the care of Health and Human Services. This is clearly a big job, considering that the Biden border crisis has led to over 300,000 encounters with unaccompanied children at our nation's southern border. I'm sure that these precious children thought they would finally be safe under the care of Health and Human Services and the sponsors they were ultimately going to be released to. But Secretary Becerra proved what we already knew. It was that he was not up to the challenge of such a large department with such expansive authority, and he had no experience that was relative. Without explanation, HHS loosened the vetting requirements for sponsors, eliminating certain background checks and reviews of the children's files. Since then, HHS has lost contact with more than 85,000 of these children. Back in February, the New York Times released a horrific expose showing how these children have since been trafficked and exploited for labor. And these are only the stories of the children that the reporters could find. Now think about the enormity of this situation. 85,000 children. They cannot locate them. They do not know who is in charge of them. They do not know if they are dead or alive. They do not know if they are working in a processing plant or a manufacturing plant, or if they're being trafficked for sex, or if they're in a labor gang, because they cannot find these children. And they decided to loosen the vetting requirements. Vetting takes too long. We need to speed up the process. So that is the mess that we find coming from Health and Human Services and its secretary, its chief officer, Becerra. If you have any doubt that Mr. Becerra had direct knowledge of this crisis, look no further than his own words. That same New York Times report referenced an audio recording taken during a staff meeting with the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, that is a department within Health and Human Services. When Becerra was admonishing his staff about their lack of speed in vetting sponsors and discharging these children into their care, he said, and I quote, "If Henry Ford had seen this in his plans, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line." And if that doesn't convince you, listen to the whistleblowers who begged HHS leadership to listen. HHS employees on the ground noticed alarming signs of exploitation and raised it to their supervisors. "This is urgent," one wrote. She was ignored. Again and again, staffers and contractors told HHS something was wrong, and the reports allegedly reached Secretary Becerra's desk. Even the senior staffer overseeing the unaccompanied minor program noted in an email to the department's leadership, and I quote, "If nothing continues to be done, there will be a catastrophic event," end quote. These reports were not just ignored. Those who spoke up were retaliated against, they were fired, they were silenced. Think about this. You're working in a department. You see things are going wrong. You hear the chief guy say, "If Henry Ford had seen this in his plants, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line." You report it. You say things aren't right here. Children are being exploited. They're being used for labor. They are being used for sex. We cannot find these children. Nothing has been done. So don't just take my word for it. That's according to a report from the Health and Human Services Inspector General. When Secretary Becerra appeared before the Senate Finance Committee back in March, I asked him what he knew about the exploitation of these children and when he knew it. Unsurprisingly, he evaded that question, didn't get an answer. So, after the hearing, I wrote him a letter asking again about his knowledge of these neglected and lost children and what role he had in firing the very people who were trying to sound the alarm and say something needs to be done. Didn't hear a word until September 8th, and the response I got from HHS was little more than an outline of their failed policies. They did not answer a single one of the questions about the Secretary's involvement in the decision-making process of what needed to be done to go find 85,000 children. Not a word. So I sent a follow-up letter giving the Secretary one more chance to answer the questions. The Senate has a duty to conduct oversight, Mr. President, and I take that responsibility and that duty seriously. The Secretary should take this responsibility and his duty to respond to us seriously. Where are these children? How are you vetting these children? I had really hoped that my friends across the aisle, for all of their talk of compassion and trying to be compassionate to individuals and looking at border policies, that they would take this responsibility seriously as well. But our Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats seem content with distracting and deflecting from the crisis of leadership that is occurring over at Health and Human Services. In a hearing back in June that was supposedly intended to ensure the well-being of unaccompanied migrant children, Chairman Durbin didn't call a single government witness to testify about what is happening with these unaccompanied alien migrant children. We cannot just turn a blind eye or try to sweep this under the rug. We are talking about children. Children that are in a strange country, children that do not have an adult to look after them, children who maybe were lured here on a false premise. But, Mr. President, this is something our Judiciary Committee and Chairman Durbin should take up. We should bring the Secretary in and find out what is happening at Health and Human Services with the Office of Refugee Resettlement and with these children. I said it back in 2021, I'll say it again, Secretary Becerra is not fit to serve as the HHS Secretary, and his continued disregard for the lives of these children, the non-response on answering these questions proves that point.